Amazing. Thank you everyone so much for being with us again. This is our last session of the day. It's been such a wonderful day so far, and we're so excited to round things off with our theme of parenting, family, and social institution. We have 4 wonderful presenters during this time, and we're going to begin with Yvonne.
The clicker there should work for you.
Can I test it out?
Yeah, please test it. Oh, it's not working yet? All right, let's try now.
Oh, okay, perfect.
There you go.
Okay, so hi everybody. Thank you all for attending. My name is Yvonne, and my presentation today will be on immigrant families, helicopter parenting, and perception of independence among second-generation university students. To begin, I will be providing some background knowledge on assimilation theory, the model minority, and helicopter parenting, followed by my hypothesis, methodology, and I will conclude with my findings and discussion. To start off with classical assimilation, we find that immigrants mimic the behavior of the dominant population in society. This is called behavioral assimilation. However, because they only adapt to the behavioral patterns of the host society, they aren't properly integrated with their new home territory. This is contrasted by structural assimilation, where immigrants and their families are integrated into organization and institutional activities. Immigrants thus create social relationships and networks to aid in upward mobility, with structural assimilation appearing to be the key to acculturation. In North America, social scientists found disparities between second generations and the way they are integrated into society. Several factors such as economic opportunity, racial stratification, human capital, and social relationships affect the incorporation of immigrants and how they become integrated into systems of stratification that can lead to different ways of adaptation. This is known as segmented assimilation. The first type of adaptation is the ideas of acculturation, where newcomers become so integrated into the middle class that they are almost indistinguishable from their native borns. The second one is the opposite, where immigrants are associated with lower class citizens and they remain in permanent poverty. The last one is where second generations achieve economic advancement, but they retain some of their country of origin's values and culture. Relating the third type of adaptation to the minority culture of mobility, a set of cultural elements that is associated with the minority group, providing them with strategies for managing discrimination and economic mobility. Immigrants end up facing their own distinct set of problems, which is why these cultural elements help them in this. I relate this with the model minority argument, as East Asians are seen to be the ideal immigrants because they are perceived to be law-abiding, hardworking, and high achievers. As such, their Asianness is accepted and even praised as the model minority despite racial and color line differences. In fact, some native citizens feel their schools and workplaces are becoming too Asianized as they set such high standards. As a result, Asianness is a norm for academic and occupational achievement that both native and immigrants are expected to reach. With these high expectations, it is easy to wonder how children are raised to achieve these standards. Native-born parents have also critiqued Asian parenting approaches, saying they are too strict and rigid, where the kids have no time to relax and de-wind, as their schedule is always packed with academic developed learning extracurriculars. This got me to associate this highly meticulous parenting style with helicopter parenting. So helicopter parents are known to hover around their children, providing excessive levels of parental protection and control of their offspring, hoping to manage and improve the child's success. This led me to my research question, where I want to see if, first, all second generation participants experience pressure to achieve education and career success according to acculturation practices from assimilation theory. The second is that if there is a strong correlation between East Asians or any ethnicity and how helicopter parenting is a form of supporting second generational success. To better understand the various ways parental expectations affect universities' perception of academic autonomy and independence, I created a survey for undergrad university students at the University of British Columbia. I received over 86 completed responses, categorizing each participant into 8 different ethnicity groups, which is white, Black, Latin American, Middle Eastern, South Asian, East Asian, and others. Unfortunately, I didn't get enough responses from some ethnic groups, so I'll be focusing on white, South Asian, East Asian, and Middle Eastern participants. Using a gap analysis, I compared how different ethnicities perceive their independence in relation to parental pressure, family values, and academic expectations. In the first graph, you'll see that participants were asked about having autonomy in their decision to choose UBC and their choice in their current academic program. Most of the participants indicated independence through their academic decision processes. In the next graph, we see that despite the high rates of independence, there are mixed results with students agreeing and disagreeing that their parents were influenced in their attendance at UBC. And in the second graph, we can see that for their enrollment in the academic programs, only South and East Asians had some participants agree on that. The graphs here depict ethnic groups claiming whether they feel a strong connection to their country of origin and if they feel pressure from their parents to succeed. As we can see that South Asian and Middle Easterns are quite high on the scale. Moreover, when asked about their parents' involvement in academia and if they feel high pressures of high expectations to succeed, we can see that South Asians are the highest in both categories, followed by white participants and East Asians, and Middle Easterns coming in last. Based on these findings, it is evident that 90% of participants, regardless of their ethnic group, felt they had autonomy over their academics. Yet we do notice that participants acknowledge their parents' values, expectations, and pressures have an influence on their undergrad decision choices, but it's much less than I hypothesized. Overall, the study did not indicate a strong relationship between ethnicity and parental involvement, but a substantial amount of respondents who claim autonomous choice in education may indicate to an emerging second-generation Canadian culture of independence. What I mean by this is that today, parents give freedom to their children to chart their own degrees, but maintain some sort of guiding force in their academic choice rather than fully taking charge. Similar to the third adaptation of segmented assimilation, second-generation individuals can create their own ideas of educational success and advancement while retaining the values of their culture from their parents if they so choose to. A balance of parental expectation to succeed and the ability to choose their own lifestyle can be seen as the Canadian culture of independence that allows autonomous decision-making. Immigrant parents thus allow their children to choose their own effective passages and prove themselves as candidates for their own aspirational goals, regardless of potential color line and ethnic disadvantages. For future research, though, I would love to see this study take place with several post-secondary institutions across provinces and territories in Canada. Because I was confined to the University of British Columbia, I would love to factor in social economic standing, family connection, human capital, and social networks, and how the idea of Canadian culture of independence could differ depending on the university you go to, as well as other factors besides ethnicity. So that concludes my presentation. Thank you all for listening.
All right, hello everyone, hello Zoom. So I guess we can get started. I just want to quickly go over the sections I'll be covering in my research. All right, so the topic that I am exploring, and special thanks to Dr. Hanser, is how South Asian immigrant parents' involvement in their Canadian-born children's homework shapes their relationship dynamics. And to be very transparent, this research is still ongoing. Okay, so starting off exploring this topic, I love to do some literature review. And so starting off with the topic on relationship dynamics, a lot of scholars discuss the intergenerational conflict that happens. So basically when parents have values that do not align with the children's, it can create certain tensions, and this is also known as the acculturation gap. With regards to education experience, there's something called the immigration adaptation strategy, which scholars discuss. This is all about how children do not just expect that they need to be independent learners because their parents are limited in resources, but they find that it's actually their responsibility to undergo like independent learning. So that's what this sort of strategy is about. Thirdly, scholars also discuss how there's multiple ways parents are involved. What this means is, yes, sure, let's answer the math equation, but also parents are interacting with their teachers and also telling students, like their children, how to navigate conversations with teachers and how to listen and learn, which of course does contribute to their overall academic performance. And the last theme in the literature review is about parents' values influencing. So South Asian parents have these collectivist values on discipline, hard work, which of course, again, does pass down to the child and shape their academic performance. I explored all this literature and I did find some gaps, which I'll be addressing, and this is how I will contribute to this ongoing research discourse and community. So first off, in my research, I'll highlight children's perspective. Yes, the research does discuss children's actions, this immigration strategy, but I want to actually understand what the children think about this. So for example, I discussed how parents are involved in a very diverse way. So do children also kind of understand that? How do they perceive their parents' actions as being involved in various ways than just addressing like math equations? And in addition to highlighting the children's perspective, I also learned, and researchers did acknowledge this, that there's not much research on the South Asian community. And so not only am I going to be studying that community, I'm also going to be studying children in the diaspora because it's Canadian-born children. And thirdly, a lot of the research, when they discuss academic experiences, this interaction, they discuss academic outcomes, and I'll be focusing on relationship dynamics. So these are just some of the ways I'm kind of expanding on the current discourse. And this gap leads me to my research question. So as I've already mentioned this, and to go more specifically into this question, there's two aspects of this. The first aspect is children's perspectives, which I've already mentioned. The other aspect is also I interviewed parents to kind of understand their the ways that they help out in homework and their education level as well. But again, for time's sake, I will not be diving into the parents aspect. Feel free to ask me more questions during the Q&A panel. All right, so as I embarked on my journey to research, I conducted semi-structured interviews through my personal networks. I recruited 14 participants, with 3 being parents, and they were all from the Metro Vancouver region, and I used these coding and transcribing softwares to analyze my data. All right, so starting off with the first finding, I learned that children express empathy for their parents' context, both when they receive support and when they don't. So when the parents did help the child, without even me trying to ask for a justification on why they were helping out, they would say things like, oh, you know, because my parents studied in England, that's why they were able to help with English. Or my mom's from India, that's why they cannot help with English, so they help with math. And that's kind of how they justified their parent support. The second portion about when they could not help, children would either accept that as, you know, just a limitation, accept the reality, or they would also discuss the school system as having to help out more, and they would critique the school system. So just referencing these quotes, you know, Rube discusses how, like, you know, they don't blame their mom because they don't know English, it's not their first language. That kind of reflects the sort of accepting the limitation I'm talking about. And Karen also discusses how teachers should really help out students more. And basically what all of this really indicates is that children have an understanding that it's not their parents' fault. Oh no. Sorry. Okay. Yeah. Okay. Hopefully I was quite narrative on that. Okay. Yeah. Sorry. I think actually no. This is actually where you should see these. Okay. Sorry. Yeah. So to continue, as I discussed, the parents, you know, as they were involved or not involved, I already described how children kind of justify that. And so what that really means is that children do not view their parents' limitations as, you know, their parents' fault. Rather, they are understanding and sympathetic, and that can really contribute to enhancing their relationship, and because they do not perceive their limitations as their fault. that covers it. Okay, moving on. Children have a flexible interpretation of what parental involvement means. As I mentioned, parents, of course, are involved in multiple ways, but learning about the children's perspective on this, it really shows that they don't just accept that, but they also prefer it. So Sukman, just listening to their experience, they say that they do not prefer like the parent to know the ins and outs of their, parents' involvement. They don't, they just prefer that they just provide them goals, or they just are more just there as a motivating factor. So, she considered like the involvement as just teaching her independence, for example. And these comments just demonstrate that children just accept it and they prefer this sort of involvement. And yeah, so they don't just adapt, they actually like inherit this as like what they want from their parents. Okay, and lastly, parents and children need to have similar values in academics. So just to kind of summarize what these quotes are really talking about, Priya was a student that had a really strong relationship with her parents. The parents helped out a lot in their homework. But what I noticed was they mentioned this story where the mom was talking about dropping out of soccer just so that they could focus on their studying. And that's when I noticed that they were describing a bit of a friction in their relationship. So what that demonstrates is that, yes, for sure, parents can help out with homework, as Priya's mom did, but the minute it came down to understanding that maybe their values on education do not align, there was this potential for friction. So what all of this just demonstrates is that parents don't necessarily need to be an expert in the subject. They just need to understand what the child wants and values. And so they just need to be on the same page with that. And so to continue on to my discussion, I really wanted to just demonstrate how I went from literature review and I really expanded on the points I discussed earlier. So forgetting my speaker notes because they slow me down, let's just go over here. So immigration adaptation strategy, as I had discussed this, I had also, in my findings, discussed how parents, like children understand the parents' context, and that can really help them kind of understand like where they're coming from. So this, again, reflects that. Sorry.
No, all good.
Okay, sorry. And yeah, just these other points, just my findings really just reflect the current literature on this. So, in terms of parents' involvement, children have a more enhanced view on accepting that diverse involvement. And again, parents' values, it's kind of a two-way street. It's not just parents are implementing values, but children seek a common ground on and a similar understanding of what values they both have in terms of academic performance. And I'll go to the last point in my implications. But overall, the main argument is that it's not just involvement in homework, let's get this equation done. It's really about these other three factors, which I've highlighted in my findings, that really contributed to this positive relationship and just enhancing their interactions. And in terms of implications, I do want to have 30 seconds for this. I really, one thing I really enjoyed in my research journey was I really thought that acculturation gap is all about lacking what parents lack in, but seeing all these scholars that actually talk about how parents and children are able to navigate a relationship despite cultural differences, and how I also found this through the stories I was listening to during my interviews. I really wanted to contribute to that ongoing journey in research that talks about an asset lens on the acculturation gap. And so this is definitely a point I want you all to kind of take away from my presentation. And of course, all research comes with limitations, which are all from the interviews I've done, just, biases and whatnot. And yes, thank you so much. Apologies for
Wonderful, thank you so much to you both. I would invite you to join Navneet as well, and you can have some questions.
I have a question for Yvonne. Do you know what the majors of your respondents were? Did you gather that information? And I realize you weren't doing these complex, how does major relate to whether they felt their parents influenced them or not. But I'm kind of curious about whether students who felt like their parents didn't influence them, what kind of, if there was some correlation with the kind of majors they ended up in?
I did ask for their majors and I have them, but they weren't incorporated into my study just because that wasn't what I was looking for. But if I want to go back and do look at that, I think that would be very interesting to see. I will say there was quite a large mix between like science, engineering, and art students. So it wasn't like they all came from one faculty.
For Yvonne as well, I'm just wondering how you like distributed your survey, like how did you like send it out, and how do you think that impacted your participant example?
Right. I will admit, part of using Rev, I did acknowledge that I will be using my own social media to distribute my survey, but I also asked the honors advisor, Dr. Oral, if he can also send it out to his classes. So they came from a mix of my own networks and Oral's network, I guess.
Do you think that like brought your I guess your sample population into any particular direction, or?
I can't be sure of that, but I don't think necessarily there is a correlation, because although it's my networks, there were a lot of people that I had like loose connections with, so there wasn't any specific bias on my part as to like, I know these people are gonna say like answer the question in one way. So hopefully if there is any bias, it's very limited.
So I have a question that maybe both of you can answer, and it's regarding the tension between parents and their children. What did that look like? You hinted on it a little bit, but can you talk a little bit more about how your respondents talked about those tensions? And Yvonne, I'm just wondering if you had any question on your survey about conflicts or tensions regarding those cases.
I didn't have anything specifically on my pensions. It's more so like whether or not they were involved or and if there's expectations or not necessarily how they felt about it. So maybe Navneet should like address that.
Yeah, my research did address it. So when I was interviewing the children, I was trying to understand their experiences when they were a child and also like into adulthood. And what I noticed was that when reflecting on their parents' involvement in homework, just the interactions they had, when they were describing it in the childhood, there would be conflict, like, you know, for example, just not understanding, you know, like different values, just like differences in values or just perspectives. But one pattern I noticed is that over time, as like, you know, like involvement shifts and also responsibility shifts, because, you know, parents understand that they cannot get as involved because the children's capabilities are, you know, way advanced from like what they know. So I feel like that natural sort of turning point when, you know, education also elevates and just that relationship changes, the child matures, they were able to have more positive like stories to share. So yes, there was tension, but one thing that my research really highlights is that over time, this does kind of dissolve and they end up forming a good, stronger relationship when they start to learn more about one another.
So thank you to both presenters. Those were really interesting presentations and well presented. Comment and question for the second, is it Navneet?
Yes.
Second presenter. So as a parent of a 15-year-old and 11-year-old, I was really heartened to hear about how understanding and accepting the children in your study were. So, that was really heartening. Because I think about these sorts of issues all the time in regards to my own life. Your study was South Asian families in particular. So my family isn't South Asian. Can you just tell a little more about what was specific to that cultural community in regards to your findings, and what might be more generalizable, you think, perhaps, that might apply more widely?
Yes, so in terms of just the values, so the literature talks about collectivist values because South Asian communities collectivist culture. So things such as hard work and discipline, these things were kind of transferred to the child. And it's not that the child doesn't understand that, of course, they should work hard, it's that overemphasis on education. So because during the immigration experience as well, they understand the value, like parents know the value of education, given like they may not have enough credentials to, have prestige occupations. So given their experience, they put an overemphasis on education is the way to success, which children in the Western system, they don't really kind of, see that as like as important as how the parent perceives it. And secondly, when interviewing the parents, their education system, whether it's India or Pakistan, like any of those South Asian countries, their education is actually way more advanced than the grades that are here in the Western system. So that also, like the amount of intensity in homework and just the way that they're learning about like the Pythagorean theorem in grade 1, like all of these things, like that it basically created some frictions in having them understand that okay, their child's actually learning things differently. So that's in terms of both their education experience and just their immigration experience. That also kind of, yeah, I hope that addresses the question.
That was great. Yeah, that was really, really useful. Thank you so much.
This question could apply to both. So how do you think the environment of being in Canada affects this interaction between parent and child? Does this aid this relationship of these, or does it aid or strain this relationship of these expectations, or does it kind of being this new environment provide some leniency to the child? And then the third question, does the relationship move in a positive direction because of possibly this resistance and conflict?
Okay. Can we like break down the questions a bit?
Okay. So like, how does being in this other environment, such as in Canada, affect this interaction between parent and child? Like, does it aid it? Does it strain it?
Sure, I'll go first. Yeah, so firstly, I discussed a lot about intergenerational conflict that the literature discusses, as well as the acculturation gap. So when, you're exposed to different cultures, like the child is exposed to a Western culture and then, a South Asian culture, there could be frictions in understanding. However, acculturation gap is not just about this gap in understanding, it's actually about how the two parties navigate these different cultures and find balance and create a relationship on that. So that lens, like looking at it from there, I think sure, yes, conflict in the beginning, like a lot of children were discussing how like their dad just doesn't understand like how to help with math, like their word solving techniques are too outdated and whatnot. But over time, when they try to get to know one another better, and when the parent themselves lacks, trying to like butt in all the time with the work that they're doing just because of their level of education is different, it naturally does lead to like a better understanding. And there's also like a word, I think it's mature filiality or piety. It's hard for me to pronounce it, but it basically just contributed to this parent-child dynamic in general. Like children end up taking on more responsibility and have this responsibility towards their parent. So it's not just cultural factors and just about the South Asian community. I think in general, over time, like these natural things you hear. But yeah, I hope that addresses your question.
Yeah, in terms of my research, when I was doing my literature review, a lot of the assimilation theory that was produced was in America rather than Canada. So my research was like looking into how like second generation students are addressing like issues of assimilation and parental guidance within a Canadian context. And what my research produced was what I thought was the Canadian culture of independence, where there is a balance between like parental guidance and expectations and pressure and how the students chooses to address those issues. So it's kind of more just figuring out a balance between like what is expected from your parents and how you can develop your own path in Canadian society.
Thank you, everyone. Actually, yeah, we have time for one more. Yeah.
Okay, I was really curious about your adaptation of acculturation, Yvonne, of your adaptation of acculturation theory and how that interacts with Canadian like culture of independence. And I noticed that you use the language of independence in contrast with like individualism. I was wondering if that was like a choice, or like if there are theories or concepts of individualism that you can
Yeah, kind of in my preliminary research or like my lit review, I noticed that like with East Asian communities, there's a lot of collectivism involved in there, and where Western society is very individualistic. So one of the reasons why I thought there was high pressure with second generation immigrants is because they have this idea of collectivism where they're not only representing their family, but they're representing their culture and nationality. So that like in turns make them want to succeed and do better to not only like integrate properly, like to acculturate properly into Western society, but to prove that like even though like we're immigrants, we like are capable of doing all of this, which is why I use the word independent now, because it's not just proving to others that we're good candidates, which we already proved, is now that we have the decision and the choice to do what we want to do.
Thank you so much to our wonderful presenters and to everyone for the questions. We're going to actually just move into our last couple presentations of the day now, which is super exciting. So thank you so much to you both. So up next we have Josh, and then we'll finish with Bond and Renee with you both.
Hey, hello everyone. I'm Izundu Joshua Robert Onukwulu. I'm a third-year sociology student, and today I'll be presenting the research I did for Soci 310, Canadian Society, Question of Universal and Canadian Healthcare. So I'm sure, as many of us have experienced or heard in the news, recent studies have found that the Canadian healthcare system is facing a crisis of many different issues. Things ranging from bad wait times to increasing costs are getting worse by the day for everyone, especially for more socially vulnerable populations. The Canadian healthcare system is a source of pride and identity for many Canadians, but under these circumstances, can Canadians be proud of our health system? Can we even call it universal? With my research, I argue that the Canadian healthcare system is not truly universal, and socially and medically vulnerable groups in the population can fall outside of this universal coverage. However, looking at the lives of Canadian medical heroes Tommy Douglas and Terry Fox reveals what has been done to fight for universality in Canadian healthcare and what can be done in the future for us to overcome these issues and reach that goal. Both of these men were chosen for bringing large change to Canada's healthcare system, with Douglas setting up our current healthcare system in the first place, and Fox fighting against some of its vulnerabilities by revolutionizing cancer awareness and funding. So in order to look into the problem, I first did an extensive literature review into the Canadian healthcare system. In our system, both federal and provincial and territorial governments provide funding, where the provincial and territorial governments do the actual administration of healthcare, while the federal government sets standards. The Canadian Health Act defines 5 standards for our healthcare system: universality, or the coverage of the whole population on the same terms and conditions; portability, public administration, accessibility, and comprehensiveness. The definition of universality, however, falls short. Many medical services have price tags that Canadians must pay for themselves, such as prescription drugs and dental services. This has allowed for private health to flourish under the Canadian public health system, which is a rather contradictory situation. And there are enormous costs to this failure to be universal. Healthcare in Canada has resulted in millions being unable to access and pay for the services they need, resulting in inequity across the country. By looking at the social detriments of health in Canada, we can see many groups face immense struggle under our universal system. These groups include Indigenous Canadians, immigrant and refugee Canadians, and Canadian cancer patients. For example, for many Indigenous people, the detriment of geography has a huge impact on healthcare. A large portion of Indigenous people live in rural community, which makes up 18% of Canada's population. However, only 13.6% of Canadian doctors are present there, and less than 3% of Canadian specialists are operating in that area. Delays in access is a huge issue. For example, in Nunavut, 58% of hospital patients actually have to be flown out of the territory in order to get treatment. For immigrant and refugee Canadians, they face difficulty. They are twice as likely to have difficulty in accessing healthcare as Canadian-born men and women, even in places with lots of hospitals. Language is the most commonly cited reason for this issue. Finally, income level in a system where not all costs are covered can create health gaps between individuals in different social classes. For example, cancer patients with lower incomes experience financial struggles as well as emotional distress, with costs for drugs and treatments that were not covered by Medicare being the primary reason for doing so. So after my literature review, I then did research into the lives of Douglas and Fox using exemplar analysis to gain an understanding of their impact on the healthcare system in the past and now. I primarily used online public media and public blogs in order to do this, as these are the most available resources for me and the time frame of this project. Since I wanted to connect the past and the present with my analysis, I found sources while they were alive or just after their death for both men, as well as sources talking about them now. McLean's and CBC's archives helped with finding these older resources. So first we'll begin with Tommy Douglas. Commonly known as the father of Medicare, Douglas started out like many other Canadians as an immigrant to Canada. He was lucky enough to receive free surgery as a child for a bone infection, and which his family would not have been able to ever afford it in the first place, actually. And that later inspired him to believe that medical care should be available to every single Canadian, no matter their wealth or status. These beliefs strengthened further as he served as a pastor during the Great Depression and witnessed the impact lack of money had on healthcare. People who were barely surviving on government funds were still succumbing to death anyways because they couldn't afford treatment for diseases. After this, he was inspired to run for premier in his home province of Saskatchewan, and under his leadership, he passed the first comprehensive health insurance plan in Canada, which later worked as the groundwork for what Canada based their public health system upon. He moved into federal politics, and despite initially failing to get elected at that level and then never becoming premier or prime minister himself, his strength of will is what led to Canada adopting his province's medical system countrywide. As for Fox, Terry Fox was a regular young man who got diagnosed with bone cancer and was forced to amputate his leg. His treatment exposed him to the lack of cancer research funds in Canada, so he was inspired to train and to run across the country in his Marathon of Hope to bring attention and funds to the issue. His journey started small, but soon millions of eyes were upon him and donations began to pour in. Despite his fierce stubbornness, however, Fox became ill yet again on his journey and was forced to stop. He later died, but donations for his cause kept pouring in, and now there are runs every year to this day across the world for Terry Fox and his beliefs. The money he raises still contributes to the research and development of cancer methods to this day. As you can see here, Dr. Ralph DaCosta, who works in the Ontario Cancer Institute, he was a man who saw him running and then now is working in programs with the money that he raised and continues to raise to this day. So what can we learn from these two and their stories together? Comparing the men reveals perseverance as a key shared characteristic, which helped them bring change to Canada's healthcare system. Studies have found that the Canadian healthcare system is extremely slow to change. However, both Douglas facing loss in his riding and then for Prime Minister federally, and Fox losing one leg to only run over 5,000 kilometers for charity without it, shows how even through immense struggles against the slowness of our system, perseverance is immensely powerful. To bring change and complete both their ideals in Canada, we need to embody their form of perseverance to tackle Canada's healthcare system crisis, taking their micro experience to a macro level. In conclusion, as revealed through the social detriments of health, the Canadian healthcare system is far from the universal it claims to be. Geographic, language, and even income barriers run rampant, and they're only getting worse for more vulnerable populations as wait times worsen and costs for dental and prescription care remain. Douglas fought hard against these through establishing our system, but his dream of making healthcare delivery to those who are more medically and socially vulnerable was never realized. Meanwhile, Fox's legacy helped revolutionize cancer research in Canada and contributes to the founding of new treatments and screenings to this day. But his ideals will never be realized either in a system that puts the treatments he helps discover out of reach of those who truly need it through time, cost, geography, and so on. Canada's slowest to adapt is holding back the dreams of both these men. But by embodying their shared trait of perseverance and trying to change our healthcare system with strong policies, we can fight to get past this slowness. After my research, which was back in fall, recently the federal government decided to expand dental insurance coverage, and this is a start towards improvement. The NDP party's perseverance on this issue is a great example of perseverance diffusing out and making social difference, but more needs to happen still. They're working towards removing private insurance reallocating tax funds to spend more on public health care, increasing rural community coverage, ensuring translation is available to all those who need it, and federally funding dental care. A truly universal healthcare system for every Canadian is within reach. Thank you for listening.
I'm Catherine Corrigal-Brown, the head of sociology at UBC. Thanks for watching our video. To learn more about UBC sociology, please subscribe.